Hello everyone and welcome back to JB's Total Gaming, where today I have a very special video for you all about Star Wars Legion. I'm going to talk about what this game is, we're going to talk about what you get in the base set, what it's going to cost, and how you play the game. Basically, there's a lot of information out there, and I've tried to pull together everything I could to try to tell you everything I've learned about the game so far, kind of a one-stop shop for everything you need to know about Legion. Now, Legion is coming out from Fantasy Flight Games. Obviously, if you're a board gamer, you know they have the Star Wars license. They have X-Wing, they have Armada, and they have Imperial Assault, and they have the Destiny card dice game and all of that. A bunch of different stuff. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is this is going to be a miniatures game, a miniatures war game in every sense of the word. And you might say, well, they already have that. If you're into Imperial Assault, there is a rule set where you can use those miniatures to fight against each other. How is this going to interact with that, if at all? Well, I do want to say that so far, those miniatures are not going to be compatible with Star Wars Legion. They have pointed out, for one thing, these models are a slightly bigger scale than in Imperial Assault. You're going to have just bigger units than you would use in that. And the models are a much higher quality, and well, that's what they're saying. And so far from what I've seen, they are higher quality, but we'll get into how this is going to work. Now, some people are very disappointed by that fact and saying, why am I spending more money on this when you're doing this? What are you going to support? I actually don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. As much as it would be cool if they integrate those and make cards for those existing models, I also feel like these two games are going to go after two possibly very different player bases. While this game might attract people into the more board game playing and somewhat simplistic, I don't want to say it's simplistic, but more simplistic than the rules of a war game in a smaller scale, while it may attract some people over to also buy Legion, and I'm sure Fantasy Flight is hoping people will do that, I don't necessarily think these two are going to be exact direct competitors. Armada and X-Wing have both found player bases, as one is a very tactical game and one is a more strategic game, and I think that's going to be the case with this. Armada is on a bigger scale. This is definitely on a bigger scale. This is going to be a miniatures game in every sense of the word, and a large scale miniatures game. I'm someone who's recently been getting back into miniatures gaming a lot, but I also tend to like more skirmish level games, where this is going to be more like Warhammer, where you're going to have relatively large armies, lots of units and things like that. That's also going to involve cutting models off of screws, putting them together, painting them, making your own terrain. Some people are aggravated, hey, in Imperial Assault, I have, the board I can lay down, there can be two-dimensional terrain, there can be things, X-Wing and Armada, we put the different debris fields and asteroids or space station or whatever you have in each of those games out automatically. I don't need to buy extra stuff. When I say this is a miniatures game, it's a miniatures game in every way. Cutting the models off, putting them together. Now, Fantasy Flight has said these models are going to be relatively easy to put together compared to some other models. However, that does also allow them to make maybe a little bit higher quality and things like that, which is one of their arguments. So if you're totally against that, maybe you want to stay away from this. However, if you're already a miniatures gamer and you were looking for something, a little bit more complicated, a little bit meatier, an actual miniatures war game, and you enjoy that aspect of putting together models and painting them the way you want to do it, then this is going to be right up your alley. This is what this game is looking for. So you can go to the Fantasy Flight website and check it out if you want to. It is available for pre-order. It's basically $90 US, $89.95. There are places where you can find it. There are some sites that are already sold out. I just want to point out, Miniature Market, as of right now, still has pre-orders available at $72, so just helping consumers out there if they want to check it out. That's the best price I've seen so far to place it is available. So let's take a look at what we actually have here and how it's going to play. So they're saying 1 to 2 hours. It could potentially get longer than that. I don't know if this is kind of set around just what comes in the core box, because in the core box, you are going to get a Rebel army and an Imperial army. However, from information I found, you'll have enough for maybe half of like an official army size. The base game, the full game, is going to be around 800 points, and if you put a bunch of upgrades and things like that in, it'll vary, but basically you're going to give out half of that value in this set. We're going to talk about how you build armies later on in the video when we talk about how to actually play the game, but just to let you know, just like every other game, they're going to have waves of expansions to come out, so the base set isn't going to give you enough to have a full army, but I would suggest expanding your army, getting other expansions, not buying two base sets, because you're kind of wasting it, because you can't have two Lukes and two Vaders. In the base set, you have one commander for each side, Luke and Vader. You have, I believe it's 3 units of base troops. It might be 2 units of base troops. I will actually look at a picture that has everything in it. And then each side is going to have a type of vehicle sort of thing. For the Empire, it's going to be 2 speeders, which are kind of neat. They get basically soft cover because they're always traveling. They make a mandatory movement as part of their activation. So in a way, they kind of have 3 actions, so the 2 like everyone else, but it's mandatory. You have to move your full movement because the speeders are always flying by. It upgrades soft cover to hard cover. We'll get into how all that works into how the game plays, where the Rebels have a AT-RT Walker, a Clone Wars era thing that they've salvaged, because this is set around, you can see the units in this game are kind of Battle of Endor. This is kind of original trilogy era, and now they may expand into other eras as well, I don't know, but the base game overall is original era. So it is a full-fledged miniatures game, $90 base set. It won't get you 2 full armies, but it'll get you started, the rules, the tokens, and the measuring things and the stuff you need in order to get started out. So I figured I'd just show off a few images of it. Here you can see the Walker I was talking about for the Rebels, and you can see it surrounded by Stormtroopers and Darth Vader. Again, I want to point out these models aren't painted. These were painted by people who do this sort of thing and put together, but just to give you an example of what the game could look like. And again, it doesn't come with terrain, so bear that in mind if that's something that you either like or dislike, depending on your experience in miniatures gaming or your interest in getting into miniatures gaming. So here's another image here. We can see Luke and Vader going head to head. We can see some of the Rebel troops in the background as well, and we'll get into how your leaders work and things like that when we get into how the game is played. I just want to show off a few images. Now, this site here, Geek and Sundry, is covering the game. When I show you how to play the game, I'm proxying in models because obviously I don't have the game yet. It's not out. But these are like movement 1, 2, and 3 tools, and I'll kind of demonstrate it with the Armada tool in the game. But when I'm showing you the Armada tool, this is basically how these are going to work. They only have one junction in them. You can turn them up to 90 degrees. They're not nearly as fiddly as the Armada tool, and there's different sized ones for each of the 3 movements, which is kind of a nice thing. So the movement and all of that isn't based on inches in this game. It's based on ranges. Your movement, you can move up to 1, 2, or 3 depending on your model's movements. Use the tools for that, and there's like a range finder, if you will, for different ranges 1, 2, and 3, like their other miniatures games. And I did want to show there's some cool pictures here. A unit card, and we'll look at some upgrade cards in a second. I mostly want to show off a unit card here. I, again, talk about unit cards in the when we talk about how to play, but here's an example of what they would actually look like. You see the Rebels, you see their points, the type of upgrades that they can have, and this unit, this is the Walker, so it has armor, it has abilities to climb and stuff like that. And here you can see that it has this ability. This is basically its melee ability. It has these grappling claws that roll 3 red dice, or it has range 1 to 3 blasters that roll 2 white dice. You can see here it has an offensive ability, and I'll talk about this again in the playthrough, that it turns surges into critical hits. And here's its speed is 2, and basically its health, and then I actually don't remember what the gear, but this gives you a pretty good idea of how this works. However, this also shows you an upgrade card. This is 35 points. Remember, the unit's only 55. This is 35 points, but this card basically gives it a different ranged weapon. You notice it's 2 to 4, so it doesn't work in close range, but it rolls 2 black and a red dice. It has impact, which is important. I will get into how that works if you want to take out armor and things like that. And it's fixed on the front, so it can fire in the front 90 degrees. As opposed to some weapons that can go all the way around. So there's kind of an idea, and we'll show off some close-ups of some of the actual upgrade cards. Here you can see like Vader's Force Choke. And again, these are cards you can add to things, and the symbol in the bottom left corner of Vader, those are the Force power symbols. You can see, I talk about in how to play, like adding a special Stormtrooper unit to a group of units, things like that. Flamethrower targeting, so, but this gives you an idea of the icons, show you what type of upgrade is. The cards show you which types of upgrades the cards the unit cards can have, just like X-Wing and Armada. And a lot of these cards are cards that you are going to exhaust. So that's what this symbol here means with the arrow, where you'll exhaust it, and those cards you actually have to take like a refresh action. They don't just unexhaust at the end of the round. So there's kind of an idea of what the unit cards and things will look like, and here is the full game basically. Everything you get kind of displayed out, and you can see they have the troops, they have the speeders or troops in the Walker, and then you have Luke and Vader. So there you go. This is a full-fledged miniatures game. You don't necessarily get a big enough to play a full army in in the starter set, but that's kind of expected in a skirmish level game. In a skirmish level game, I expect to be able to play a full game right out of the box with the starter set. This one, that isn't the case. I mean, but you can learn to play with the units here. You can certainly have enough units to play, one or a couple learning games with this, though. And I do like you can play that out of the box. I like the tools that have the different sizes available, not trying to use just one tool and being wonky with it. And overall, the production value seems pretty solid. So let's get into how you actually play the game, and then we'll come back and I'll talk a little bit about what I think of the game so far and who this game may be for, even though it's not out yet. Alright, so now that we've talked about the basics of the game, what you get in the core box and things like that, let's talk about how to actually play the game. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is building an army. So, obviously, I don't have a core set as it's not out yet, and we're going to do some proxying again. We're going to use some Dust Tactics cards to talk about army building. Now, when you build an army, it's interesting because in the core set, you're going to have the units you have, and you're pretty much going to use all of those units. You have Luke and base troopers and the ATRT Walker. You have Vader, base troopers, and the speeders. So that's what you're going to have. You're going to use all those units. And you'd be playing on a 3x6 area, much like Armada. So now, one of the cool things about it is you're going to have at least one commander. So for this example, I'm using a hero unit from Dust Tactics to represent a commander. Now, these are going to be a lot of points. You can put upgrades on them. The ones that come in the box, Luke and Vader, have in particular like force power upgrades you can put on them, which are kind of cool and give them cool abilities. And they're going to take up a decent amount of points, that one unit. But I find it interesting that you can have one or two commanders. Obviously, you're going to have expansions and different commanders and things like that, which is particularly interesting because at least one of the layouts that you can possibly have for where you're placing your armies can have them separated. And remember, it's in order. Well, we'll talk about activating units and things like that on the board and why that's important, and one of the reasons why it might be nice to have more than one commander. They're very powerful, but again, they take up a lot of points. Now, then you have to have at least 3 units of regular units. So for here, I'm just representing this as kind of a regular unit, and those are kind of the troopers, either the stormtroopers or the rebel troopers you get in the box, kind of base units. They're going to make up the bulk of your army. And then you can have also up to 3 support units. I meant to put this guy here. So support units, I'm not exactly sure what they're all going to entail. For here, I have like a sniper recon team, and as an example of a support unit. So you have to have at least that 3 base. And then you can have up to 3 support units. So you can have 0 to 3 is my understanding of that when you're building your army. And then you can have 0 to 2 heavy units. So these would be like the walkers and the speeders and things like that have armor, and we'll get into how that works. Now, you can have up to 800 points in a regular game, and then the points that you bring into it will make a determination in how the game is actually set up, which is similar to Armada, where whoever has the lowest point value gets to pick who's first or second player. However, how the objectives work in this game is very different. So this is an objective-based game. This isn't just to kill the enemy sort of game like X-Wing, which was one of my knocks on X-Wing when I talked about it. But the way you do the objectives is going to be different than in Armada. So in Armada, you had the 3 different color decks. You'd bring one of each color, and then whoever was the second player, got to give the first player their objectives. I think I remember that properly. This game's going to be very different. You're going to have a deck of cards, but there are going to be 3 different decks. There's going to be a deck for deployment zones, there's going to be a deck for special rules, and a deck of objectives. In the base game, there are 4 of each of those cards, and 3 will be dealt out. Obviously, with expansion things, there'll be more of those, but that's what comes in the base game. So there's also going to be 1 of the 4 left out. And then whoever has the lower total gets to pick first. I don't remember exactly how it works, but I believe they get to eliminate 1 first, and then it goes to the other player or something like that. But basically, every time you play, you're going to have different combination. I mean, you're going to run out of combinations eventually, but different combinations of deployment zones, objectives, and special rules for that mission, which can really change things up. For example, one of the deployment zone maps has like a section in one corner and then a section in another corner for each team. So they're kind of spread out across the map. So that's why I was saying hero units can be important because, well, those hero units are going to be the ones issuing activation orders to other units, but how you actually do the things like that is what we'll talk about next. Now, for this example, I'm obviously scaling things way, way down, but I want to make things as clear as possible, as simple as possible. So, for example, let's say this is our Luke unit, our hero unit, in this case being Rhino. We have a unit of regular troopers over here, and then the ATRT Walker over here. At the start of a round, you have the command phase, and during the command phase, each player is going to play a card from their command deck. Now, there are 4 base cards that I believe are pretty much the same for both factions. They either have 1, 2, 3, or 4 pips. The pips are basically determining turn order. So if I play a card with 1 pip, you play a card with 2 pips, I will go first. Now, if there's a tie, a certain player rolls a die to see if they get a certain thing to see if they go first or not. So there's a risk if you really want to go first and then you play a tied card. So it may be worth holding back those cards with less pips in order to, for later on if you need to activate first. But at the same time, there are also special cards that commanders can bring. For example, Vader and Luke have their own special cards they can put in the command deck. You can have 7 cards total, 2 1s, 2 2s, and 2 3s. And then your 4th card is just your generic slow-moving regular action card, and that card you actually take back into your hand at the end of a round. This is a somewhat similar mechanism to Warhammer Disc Wars, a game I've played quite a bit with my son, where you play a card at the beginning of the round. But how this is going to work, each player is going to play a card. You'll determine who's first. Now, that card is going to determine how many actions your leader can issue. Now, your leader can only issue a command to somebody within command range. Now, I'm using the Armada tool here, and there's a reason I'm using this, but there will be custom, things in the game with different ranges, and they can be used, there are things for movement, but they are much simpler. Instead of having these pips on them like this does, you can basically turn them up to 90 degrees in any point. So if you have a movement of 1, you use the 1 template, there's a thing in it, and you can turn it like 90 degrees and stuff like that for movements. So a little bit probably less fiddly than this thing from Armada. So usually I believe commanders, at least the commanders in the starter deck, have a range of 3, which is a pretty big range, but it's not going to cover all of a 6-foot long map, so that's something to bear in mind. Another advantage for having maybe 2 leaders in your group. But they'll only be able to issue a number of tokens based on how many orders they can issue on that card. So quicker moving cards are going to have less orders they can issue. Maybe they can only issue 1 order to a troop within range. And you might say, well, why would you want to do that? Well, everything's going to be able to activate. However, you don't know what order the other units are going to activate in. So for example, if I played that 1 and I can only do 1 activation, I could pick my leader as a unit that I can activate whenever I want. I could pick the walker or my troops. If I say I want to pick the troops in this example, then I'd put an activation token for my troops by them, and then the rest of my tokens would basically be shuffled up. They can put in the bag just off to the side, whatever, but face down. So at any point during my turn, when I issue an order, I can issue one of the ones already out on the table, or take a chance and pick one of the tokens that I have available to me. So that's meant to represent a bit of a fog of war. I don't know if I like or dislike that. I certainly find it interesting, and I'll probably have to play it to determine if that's something I actually like or not. Not having that full control, but at the same time maybe getting advantages for going early. Now, the leader cards have these unique special abilities. They may be have less activations or something like that, but give a particular unit a special ability or a hero a special ability or something like that. So the leader cards are interesting to play as well in the command phase. So let's say I put down a token on these guys, I'm going to be activating first. Now the things you can do in a turn, every unit is going to have 2 actions. And, well, this is going to work a lot like other games. You can move, you can fire. Movement is the only thing you can do twice. There are, of course, things that break the rules, characters who can do a melee attack after a move, things like that, and a bunch of special abilities that come into play. But there are other things you can do, like aim. So aiming gives you an aim token, and this would be very similar to, say, like a focus token or something like that in X-Wing, because it lets you re-roll 2 dice if you have a focus token. If you end up not using that focus token, it will go away at the end of the round in the end phase. You can also take a dodge token. So a dodge token basically lets you negate a regular hit. This game is going to have regular and critical hits, much like Fantasy Flight's other miniatures games. Critical hits cannot be blocked with cover, which we'll get into, or evade tokens. So that's something to keep in mind. They can be blocked by rolling block on your armor dice. That's the only thing that can normally stop a critical hit. So that's what the dodge token does. You can also do like a refresh action. It is an action that you have to do, so if you have characters like Luke or Vader that have force abilities and they are exhausted, because we can't cold tap, and it would allow them to unexhaust those cards or whatever, to refresh those cards, whatever terminology is used in the game. So that's another one of the actions you can do. So for this example, let's say we're going to activate this unit, and then my other these 2 units that I didn't have an activation token for would be off to the side, and then when it comes back to me, because it is an I go, you go, with 1 activation. So when it comes back to me, I'll have to draw from that pile. And I could have drawn from that pile originally. I don't know why I would do that, but then I would activate whichever of these 2 units is in that pile. So let's say I want to do a move and shoot. So for this example, let's say this guy here is our leader. Every unit of more than 1 people is going to have a leader unit. Now here's one of the things I really like about the game. So let's say for this example I have a movement of 1 which would go up to here, and I could turn, even though this doesn't turn 90 degrees, I could, and I will go and place my leader somewhere. Now I don't have to move my full movement, but let's say I want to place them up into here. And for this example we're going to call this soft cover and this hard cover, just for this example. Now here's one thing I really super like about this game. After you move your leader, then you can place your other units within a like range 1 or something like that, or a certain range of your leader. So once I've measured once, I can move these units, I can move them ahead, behind, whatever. All movement is going to be based on your leader. You're going to move them first. So I'm going to want to, probably put them behind cover as well. But that's something super important to keep in mind, and something I really like about this game. If you have a big unit, and there are, upgrade cards and things like that. I didn't really talk about the cards. They have the things that you'd expect. There are going to be different colored dice for attack, for defense, things like that. And the card's going to tell you what surges do. So this game is going to have hits. It's going to have critical hits. Each die, no matter what the color is, they all do different things, but they all only have 1 critical hit in this game, which is something very different. And then we're going to have surges. In this case, we have like focus, but let's just, for this example, say that these are focus. So your character card is going to tell you what a focus does on offense and on defense. Some units are going to have 1 of those blocked out, which they don't do anything. They might have them both blocked out, or maybe only on special abilities they activate. Maybe surges give you an extra defense on the fence, something like that. They also have icons on them, much like X-Wing or Armada, that basically tell you what sort of upgrades you can put on that card. Maybe there's a grenade token for a grenade type of upgrade you can give a unit. There are units that can put in special forces. So let's say, special units. So like, for example, there's a Stormtrooper unit in the game that has a Stormtrooper icon upgrade. You can add maybe this 1 extra unit to your Stormtrooper unit, but that unit is special and it has this special ability and it costs more points because of that. So that's the way upgrades are going to work, and a basic rundown of how the cards are going to look in the game. Now, for this example, so I went ahead and moved. So if I had already been in that position, maybe I would aim and shoot, or maybe I would dodge and shoot. But for this example, I only have 2 actions. I've already moved, so I'll go ahead and shoot. So let's say that these units had 1 red die each. Now, this isn't what regular troopers have in the game, but they will have different weapons. A lot of units will have more than 1 weapon. They might have a ranged 1 to 3, so anything within range 3 they can shoot at, and then a die color or multiple dice for that attack. So these units, being just regular units, they're going to have 1 each. So if I have 3 units, I'll roll 3. If I lose a unit later, I'll roll 2, 1, so on and so forth. An important thing to keep in mind, too, is the leader always has to be the last unit destroyed. So this is a super key thing, because this game doesn't do a thing where you have to use an action to nominate a new leader or things like that. So your leader is super key. Your leader also determines your basic line of sight of people in cover and things like that. So in this example here, we're attacking 3 units, and a unit has cover if at least half of its units are in cover. So here we have 3 units, and if we draw a line from the leader to these units, we can see 2 of the 3 are in base-to-base contact with that cover, therefore they have cover. Now in this game, soft cover will block 1 regular hit. Remember, they don't block crits. Hard cover will block 2 regular hits. So that's something to bear in mind. So this is actually going to be pretty tough for this unit to hit this other unit unless they roll crits. Remember, each die, even though the dice are more powerful than other ones, depending on the color, each die only has 1 crit. So let's go ahead and roll here. And so we rolled 1 crit. We're calling these focus like a surge. And remember, these dice don't line up exactly with the dice in the game. I'm just using them as an example. And let's say this unit doesn't have an ability to do anything special with that. So they rolled 1 crit, so that would probably get through. Now let's say there are different color dice you can use on defense, But for this example, let's say they roll a green die for defense. They got hit once, they get to roll one armor roll. So if this is what we're calling a block, there's the one thing that would be able to actually block a crit. That cover isn't going to stop it. So if I rolled 2 hits in the crit, it would have been the same example. This cover would have blocked those 2 regular hits, but the crit would get through. But the only thing, and again, even if they had a dodge token, if they had a dodge token and I rolled 3 hits, 2 would block that. They can spend a dodge token, but rolling a block will stop a critical hit. So in this case, they wouldn't lose a unit. If they did lose a unit in this example, then they would, if they didn't roll a block, they'd lose 1 unit, and then I'd go back to the other player. They can take a turn. So again, everything is based on your leader. So if I was here in this example, maybe I would be able to see 2 of the 3. So all of my units wouldn't consider this group in cover. So there's another thing to keep in mind. So leaders are super, super important. There are rules for melee. For example, if I get a unit into melee, then everybody's engaged in melee basically, and you can't shoot into units that are engaged. So there is no potential friendly fire in this game. You can't attack with a negative modifier if you're attacking a unit. And it actually would be easier for this example if I just say use this hero unit, because this is the example I saw in one of the videos. So I'm not exactly sure how it works with big groups, but I know they showed an example where a big unit comes in, the other units then all come into melee. So if it goes back to the green player's turn, they wouldn't be able to fire on any of these units. However, these units also wouldn't be able to make ranged attacks on this unit. So you can get in with maybe a very tough hero, maybe it already has a dodge token or something, can get in there and basically tie up ranged units because they won't be, now they may be able to attack someone else. I'm not sure about every rule in the game, obviously, but that's an interesting little thing where you can't have any range combat going on in there. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the other things on the card. So if you've seen any examples or things like that of the cards and some of the special abilities, we can talk a little about what they do. So in general, armored units are going to have armor. So armor is a special ability where basically regular hits don't do nothing. So that's a really, really big deal. So if you're going against an armor unit and you're just firing with regular troops, you're going to have to roll crits to hit that thing. There's only 1 on each die, so that's super, super hard. So how do you get past that? Well, you have units that have impact. So they are heavy hitters. Maybe they have a particularly heavy weapon, another armor unit, Vader or Luke with lightsabers, because lightsabers can just cut through that. So impact is interesting. So let's say, for example, I rolled 3 regular hits with Luke's lightsaber or something like that. And I don't remember what Luke's stats are. I know Vader has impact 3. So in this example, because he has impact 3, you would actually be able to turn 3 regular hits into crits. So a unit might have impact 1, impact 2, so there'll be a number in parentheses. So that's a super important thing to keep in mind. So one thing, you want to be sure you have units that can take out heavy armor. Taking out the units that can take out heavy armor before your army's gone may be a really powerful thing to do, because then your opponent's going to have a lot of trouble getting through the armor of those armored units. So there's Pierce that basically ignores. I'm trying to remember if I can't remember if it ignores blocks. It may do that, where basically a certain amount of damage is going to get through no matter what, and other kinds of special abilities. So basically players will go back and forth like that, activating units until everyone gets through all their activations. If a unit's destroyed, they just lose that activation token, or the one from their deck if they haven't pulled it yet. And then in the end phase, you get rid of all of the dodge and aim tokens and all of that. Now remember, cards don't flip back up. You have to actually use an action to do that. And we go back to the next round. More things I want to mention before we go back and kind of talk about things overall is the game uses true line of sight. So you have that thing where you get down, look at your model's perspective, and see what's going on. Some, in general, units can fire in 360 degrees. Regular units like this can turn in order to aim. However, a lot of units have like a front fixed weapon or something like that. They would fire in their front 90 degrees. So weapon arcs are a thing in the game. However, a lot of base units can kind of just turn in things like that. Now, there is also a suppression function in the game where units can become suppressed. They have like I don't remember if it's leadership or
whatever it is, heroism, something, some statistic that can help them cope with that. They didn't really go into detail how suppression works. However, you can suppress units and possibly get them to retreat and things like that. That is something I know is in the game, although they didn't really go into detail of it, as the video I watched was basically a demo game where they didn't get heavily into things like rough terrain, it slows movements, and all those things. But those are the basics of how a turn is going to work in Star Wars Legion.
Alright everybody, I thought this looked like a cool image from Polygon's site to put up in the background as we talked about what this game is going to be overall. So, should you be excited about this game? So here's the deal. We kind of covered the basics of what the game is. Bear that in mind that it is a full miniatures game. If you have not done putting together models, while these say they should be relatively easy, and painting and things like that, bear that in mind. You're going to want terrain, you're going to want stuff to put it together and paint it, and if you really think you can't do that, maybe have someone else do that and paint it. I mean, that's a thing you can do if you really, really want to. Or if you're potentially interested in learning that, maybe do a few practice models you get somewhere else for cheap. A lot of the local gaming stores may have some just random stuff you can pick up to practice, but this is a full miniatures game, for better or for worse. I think that's a good thing because it will separate it itself from the game style that is a more board game style with Imperial Assault. It's also a bad thing because it's going to alienate people who are already into Imperial Assault, especially if they never cross over those models. I actually think it's unlikely that they will. They may give in to demand or something like that, but I do think this game's going for a different audience and they want to sell more stuff. So if you're angry about that, I kind of understand, but I do think this is going to definitely be a different style of game. For what you get in the box, for the rules and all that, I think it's relatively reasonably priced in general. I think the starter sets for these Star Wars games have been reasonably priced. It's really going to depend on the pricing of the models afterwards. And, well, are you going to be interested in this? Bear in mind, if you haven't played a Warhammer style game or a large scale miniature game or a miniatures wars game at all, then you may be in for a lot. However, this game, I would say, could potentially be a first starter game. If you, there are smaller skirmish-style games, and I'm going to cover some more miniature games on my channel if you want to check this out. I'm currently doing a series. I've talked about X-Wing, which is a good recommendation for a beginner miniature game. Bushido is a little bit more complex, but I still think could be a starter game. I do actually think this could be a starter game. You're going to need a bigger surface with a 3x6 area, but overall, from what I've seen of the rules, this game is not nearly as complex as other games. The damage is relatively simple. You add up the dice you can roll for your people, you roll it, you see what you can change surges into or any special abilities you have, you subtract the cover into defense rolls. There isn't a lot of craziness where you're like, well, checking against this number set and then rolling to see how much potential, like, there isn't a lot. There's basically roll modify the end, so it is less complicated than some other miniatures game. Also, it isn't based on inches or anything like that. You move the leader and the rest move. It's brilliant. Some people super into certain tactical things and things like that may not like that. Bear that in mind. If you're looking for like really in-depth complex miniatures game, then this may not be for you. I do think Fantasy Flight wants this game to be something that new miniatures gamers can step into as their first game, and also have enough depth that other miniatures gamers can enjoy it. But again, bear in mind, this is probably going to be on the lighter side from what I've seen of it so far, making this game accessible to as many people as it can be, when with the Star Wars license it makes sense while they're doing that. So I'm not going to tell you if you're going to like this game or not. Obviously I haven't played it yet. I've just read stuff on it and watched videos on how to play. But overall, if you're at all interested, and I know a lot of people have been asking for like a big ground level battle game, and it's here now, and I think it's pretty accessible. It's going to be a full miniatures game. I know a lot of people wanted that, even if some people are angry about that and not including the models from Imperial Assault. But overall, I think Fantasy Flight has done a pretty good job, and if you're not interested in the painting and modeling and putting together a big area, all that, then you may want to stay away. And if you're not interested in a lighter miniatures game, you may want to stay away. But overall, again, I don't know what I think of that Fog of War, where you only have a certain number of commands and then the rest of the pile comes up randomly. I'm not sure. That might be something I hate. It might be something that's really cool. I know I love The tools, I love not having to have a tape measure and just, you can move this much and this is the ranges and it's super simple. I actually love the moving with the leader model. I think that's really cool. Some people may not like that. I personally am excited about that. And I think this game is designed to kind of whittle down some of the more obtuse, kind of complex stuff in other games to just get right to the gaming. However, if you enjoy some of those more complex things, the things that can really get in those deep strategies and take advantage of the rules and tactics of the game, this game may not have that for you. So hopefully that'll help you decide if you're interested in pre-ordering this game or not. And maybe I'll be covering it more as more information comes out. But hopefully that guys gave you a pretty good idea of what Star Wars Armada is going to be and the basics of what it's going to play like. Hopefully you guys appreciated this video. If you did, leave a like, thumbs up, whatever, and maybe check out the channel, subscribe. We just got to 300 subscribers, which I'm very excited about that. We're still a very small channel despite being around for a while. I cover video games, board games, miniatures games, whatever I can get my hands on to review, and growing the channel will really help me to potentially get out and maybe able to even get some stuff from publishers or whatnot so that I can cover more things. So, and maybe share the video if you enjoyed it. But thanks so much for watching, everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon.